Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear Review. And today we're looking at two watches. We're looking at the Mudman and the Rangeman. This is Casio month, and so we're going to go through a throwdown between the two of these watches. And we're going to go through a bunch of different specs on these watches, and I've got a list. I got kind of a rubric that I'm going to go through and give you an idea of where I'm coming from on these watches objectively and a little bit subjectively, I think. I'm going to try to limit the subjective part of this and keep this more on the function side, because when you look at watches like this, you're looking at watches that are really about function. This isn't necessarily about look, although for some people, they look at this watch and think this is a really cool, tough looking watch. I'm in the category, I think they look tough. I think there's a reason for it. I'm wearing the GD 350 right now. This is the negative display, which, by the way, is sold out on the Casio website. So if you're interested in getting this, I think you're going to have to go elsewhere, like maybe Amazon or eBay, to try to find one of these. And the rumor is that they are discontinuing this model, the GBD 350, not only the negative display, but also the positive display, which I've had for a number of months right here. So, and I like the positive display. I think it's a little bit better than the negative display overall. But this negative display, I'm eating my words, man. I like it. I like it. So there you go. This is really not about that. It's about these two watches. Let's get into the throwdown and start talking about these two watches. All right, for the throwdown, we're going to go through a bunch of different categories here. We're going to go through the chunkiness factor. We're going to go through the strap and the keeper. We're going to look at the display contrast. And we're also going to look at the legibility. So there's kind of two different pieces of legibility that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the light. We're going to look at the buttons and the design of the buttons, which buttons I think are more effective than the others. We're going to look at the case as far as the ability to clean the case. So one of the things about wearing any kind of Casio watch that you're going to be wearing outdoors, dusty conditions, muddy, rainy, all of that, is you've got all these nooks and crannies that are in here. Which of these cases is going to be the easiest to clean in the end? Like just flush it underneath a faucet or something like that. Also the solar capabilities. Now this is more of a perception. I don't have the actual numbers, like which solar panel works better than the other, but I have just one time through as far as like exposing these two watches to sunlight, which one charges up a little bit faster than the other. And it's not going to be a huge difference, but it's going to be a little bit of a difference. Multiband 6 reception. Now I put this in here because I had a watch, one of these two watches, struggled massively with updating itself on the multiband 6 function, the remote control function where it checks in with the atomic timekeeping thing, the broadcast. Now, for those of you in other countries that don't have multiband 6, there's only 6 towers around the world. That's why it's called multiband 6. That's not going to be a real relevant piece to you, so you can adjust accordingly to that. Also, the modes and user interface. So most of this is going to be pretty complementary. They're going to be very much the same as far as the overall modes that are in here. But just how you get through them and how they're displayed on here might be a little bit different as well. Legibility, of course. Usability, the actual usability of this watch. So when we get into those different modes, and we're going to look more at the compass, barometer, altimeter, because both of these have that ABC function on there, and look at that. Then we'll get into comfort. This is a little more subjective, which one's more comfortable to wear. And then we'll get into wearability for different circumstances. So if you wanted to wear this more than just outdoors, like which one kind of gives you more options as far as wearability goes. All right, let's start off with size, the chunkiness factor. Now, I did the calculations on these two, and I got to tell you, I'm really impressed. Because, let's see here, the Mudman is near... Now, this is a proportion, so let me explain what the chunkiness factor is. The chunkiness factor takes the distance or the diameter across the case and divides it by the height off the wrist. So if you have a smaller diameter and you have a fairly significant height off the wrist, it's going to appear more chunky on the wrist. If you have a wider diameter and the same height off the wrist, it's going to appear less chunky, maybe more thin on the wrist or lower profile on the wrist. So it's a chunkiness factor that I use as a guide for me to say, oh, that watch is really going to be chunky on the wrist. Now, that does not do anything to minimize the fact that tall watches, no matter how broad the case is going to catch on long sleeve shirts or jackets. Okay, it's not going to change that, but it's going to affect the perception of whether or not the watch is chunky or not. And the 350 is one of the chunkier ones that I have. And you can just see by the height off the wrist compared to the diameter of the case that it's a pretty chunky watch. And then you put it next to the Mudman, and you can see the Mudman is much wider. Okay, but then when you look at the profile, it's like, man, that watch doesn't look very chunky at all, proportionally speaking. Proportionally speaking. All right. It still has height. The height doesn't go away. All right. But between these two watches, we're going to look at the chunkiness factor. What is it? Well, for the Mudman, the chunkiness factor is a 3.561. And for the, let's see here, where did it go? The Rangeman, it's 2.940. So this is well into the not as chunky proportion as far as looks go. I actually really like the case design of the Mudman as far as the proportions go. It's a great proportion case, whereas the Rangeman, it really is taller and a little bit more stout on the wrist, so it has that chunkier feel to it. So point goes to the Mudman for that. Now, strap and keeper. This is where things, they separate really fast. I do not like the strap on the Mudman. I really don't. It's too thick. It's too stiff. And the smaller wrist that you have, the more likely you're going to feel the strap is kind of like putting pressure on certain parts of your wrist. With a thinner, more flexible strap, or both, maybe it's more flexible and thicker like you have on the Pathfinder, but if you have a thinner strap that's more flexible, you don't feel those pressure points as much on the wrist because it just conforms to your wrist a little bit better. The Rangeman is a little bit thinner, it's a little bit more flexible, and it's noticeable. It's noticeably thinner too, so this is, when it comes to durability, somebody say, well, it's not as durable. The G-Shocks really do not have a durability issue when it comes to straps. The G-Shocks. Now, the non-G-Shocks, yes, there are certain models out there where the strap is just garbage. But I really have never had an issue with a G-Shock. Give it 10, 15, probably 15 to 20 years, and maybe you will. A matter of fact, one of my Pathfinders, it's a non-G-Shock. It has a bracelet on it, and it just kind of fell apart after about 15 years. As far as there's like washers in there, and some of the washers broke off. The bracelet still worked fine, but it just had all this like lateral movement on the pin. But the point being is this, it's just too uncomfortable. Also, notice the difference between these two. You have ridges on the inside of the Rangeman on the left, and you don't have those ridges on the inside of the Mudman. That is for the keeper. It helps the keeper stay in place. So when you're wearing the watch and you put it on here, I call it the ratcheting keeper system. It actually, when you feel this, it like moves from one spot to the next, and it will tend to stay in that spot for the long term. Whereas when you have a strap and a keeper system without that, it tends to move around. Now, I have to give it to you, the Mudman, it has enough friction based on the material to kind of stay in place. But if that gets wet, maybe a little bit of oil or whatever on there, it is going to move around. It doesn't have that ratcheting piece that tends to keep it in place longer. So the strap is going to go to the Rangeman on this one. I prefer the strap on the Rangeman for a couple of important reasons. Matter of fact, I really don't like the strap of the Mudman. I think they need to back off the thickness a little bit. Okay? Display contrast. We're nitpicking here. They're great. Now, we're not talking about legibility. We're talking about the contrast. And I think there's a component to the Mudman that fuzzes it up a little bit, gets a little fuzzy. And that is, we'll turn this so that you can see this, I hope, on the camera. And you can see the compass hidden, the ghost markings on the compass on here somehow. Let's see if I can get this. So maybe you can see that. I hope it shows up. But it's there. Let's just see if that might help a little bit. But what happens is you have these ghost markings because it's a dual layer LCD. So when I hit the compass button on here, you have an overlay of another LCD on top of the LCD where the timekeeping is. So that right there is going to also impede some of the sharpness and the contrast of the time telling component down below. Okay, so the edge is going to go to the Rangeman. The contrast is just better on the Rangeman. I'm not saying it's more legible. I'm saying the contrast is better. Okay. Now the light. I think the light on the Rangeman and the Mudman are about the same. I kind of like the light on the Mudman a little bit better. I think the Rangeman, it's good, and maybe it's because it's all segmented. The display is all segmented up where I think it kind of gets lost a little bit. And the Mudman just seems really even. It's nice, bright blue color. I think it looks good. I got some pictures up here for you so you can see the difference between the two. But I kind of like the Mudman overall when it comes down to the light. So the point goes to the Mudman on that one. Now the buttons. There's two types of buttons on the Mudman, which is, I don't know about that. You know, you've got these two kind of buttons here. And when you press these in, they press in to the resin shroud that goes around it. On this side, it's a metal shroud with a plastic black button. And these are function buttons. I get that. That has to do compass, barometer, altimeter. I get those are different. But I'm just not a fan of the two different style of buttons, and the texturing on here is a little bit different. And when you have a metal shroud like this, you really have to kind of fingernail push the button in because the button, there's not much of the button sticking out. Okay. Rangeman. You've got what feels like an aluminum button on here, but the texturing on here, regardless of the material, the texturing has got some good grip to it. So when I touch it, I know I'm touching a button, and that's all of them, and they're all the same. So to me, the buttons are going to go to the Rangeman overall. Now, what about case cleanliness? So cleaning the case when it's being used in dirty conditions, it's going to go to the Mudman for sure. You just don't have quite as many crevices here and there. Plus, the display can get cleaned off really quick. It's just, it doesn't have the same opportunities that the Rangeman has as far as collecting more and more dirt. When you have basically an open surface for everything to run off the main display or the crystal versus the Rangeman is completely surrounded. So with it being completely surrounded, you have more opportunity for a lot of stuff to get in there and stay in there for a while until you actually flush it out. Okay. Is it a huge deal? Not necessarily. But as far as cleaning it goes, I'm just going to give that one to the Mudman. I think it really does make a good case for that. Now, what about solar charging? Real quick, this is not scientific. The Rangeman seemed to solar charge faster than the Mudman. That's all. Maybe that's just one-off, or maybe it was the Rangeman came to me with a little bit more juice in the battery, so it switched over to high faster than the Mudman. I don't know. It's just what happened. Maybe the Mudman is better for that. I haven't done run these both all the way down to zero and then charge them up to see what happens. That would take a long, long time because these watches, when they're running, you get 8 months of use out of the Mudman on a full charge, 6 months of use out of the Rangeman. But here's the catch. If you turn on power save mode and you were to put this watch in a drawer, how long would these watches maintain themselves as far as timekeeping goes? 23 months on the Mudman, 26 months on the Rangeman. So while you get more usable time out of the Mudman, you get more longevity out of the Rangeman, assuming you're concerned with that. I'm more concerned with the usability, so I would tend to say the Mudman has a better battery capacity overall than the Rangeman does for usable circumstances. So that goes to the Mudman. All right. What do we have now for the Multiband 6 reception? Again, I had a really hard time with the reception on the Mudman, so I'm going to give it to the Rangeman. It could be a one-off, but you know what? That's the way it goes. That's the sample size I have. I'm going with it. But I'm not going to say that is the case for all Mudmen that are out there. I'm going to say that is the case for this Mudman. It did actually last night update on its own. And I've taken this out on the road where I live. And I've climbed up, or not climbed up, but driven up on top of glacial moraine ridges to try to get a higher elevation and get this thing to remote control or remotely update the time. And it just wouldn't do it. Now, I took the Rangeman out of the box. I did it in the house standing next to a window, and it signed right up. Okay? Updated right away. So the Rangeman had no problem with that whatsoever. And for days, I have been trying to get this thing to update, and it would not days, weeks. I've been trying to get this thing to update, and it would not update. So that's going to go to the Rangeman. Now, modes and usability, user interface, I should say. Modes generally are the same. Let's go through these. I think I could do these simultaneously. So if we go here, that's world time, and this is sunrise, sunset time on the Mudman. So we'll go left and right, left, right, left, right, okay? Next one up on the Rangeman is stopwatch, and here you can record a screen. So if you're doing climbing, elevation type work on mountains, helpful for that as well. On the left, we have the timer. And on the right, we have the stopwatch. Okay, so we're kind of getting close here to start repeating things. Alarm, and you have several different alarms: 1, 2, 3, 4, snooze, signal, all that off of the Rangeman. Over here, we have the timer. That's great. And there's the alarm. Let's go through those. All right, 2, 3, 4, snooze. All right, signal, hourly signal. We'll turn it back to the 1. I like that. So pretty much the same overall across the board. There's your sunrise, sunset on the Rangeman. Here's the world time on the Mudman. And then we have the recall, which is your screensaver type work. And here is the remote control, the received signal, which is last night, or actually this morning early. And here's the received signal on this one. And we're back to time, and we're back to time. So overall, I like it. I think they're both the same. They're not going to get anything. They're the same overall. No point differential between the two. Now, legibility clearly goes to the Mudman. Obviously, when you segment the display up like they did in the Rangeman, you put the time down at the bottom half rather than the center. If you look at that, they put the time in the center of the Mudman. All right, you get maximum space across the dial, across the display. Okay, so I like that. Now, as far as the legibility of as far as the fuzziness goes, I think that knocks the legibility down just a little bit. And the time on here, now if you look at this, the display on here, it's relatively speaking, it's small, but it's actually the same size as the square, and I'm okay with the square. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm okay with it. The one on the Mudman is just that much better. So we're going to give actually a half a point to the Rangeman. We'll give the full point to the Mudman. So there's a half a point increase that way to the Mudman. Now, what about usability? When I go through and I use the compass feature, this is the most telling version, or the telling explanation of it. You can clearly see which direction I'm pointing with the compass. Okay, that dual layer LCD display clearly tells you where the compass is. I'm going to press the compass button on here, and you tell me if you can find out where it is. The compass button, the compass is inside the multi-purpose dial in there, which you can do all kinds of stuff in there, which I think is really kind of cool. It does tell you the degrees at which your watch is pointing, so that much is fine. Like you can actually tell the direction that you're pointing, so that's not a problem. But as far as like a needle or something visual, you have to look inside that multi-purpose dial, and that's legibility-wise, that's going to go to the Mudman for sure. Usability, I should say. The usability of those features is going to go to the Mudman. One thing that I do want to say, though, about the top portion up here. So if you look at the Mudman, you have the month and the date, and you click the A button. Oh, I'm in the wrong screen. I thought it was in the time screen. If I click on this, all right, I'm going to get the date of the month. I'm going to get the barometric pressure trend chart, and then I'm going to get the day of the week and the date. Okay? Now, over here, the month and the date are always there. What I'm cycling through is the barometric pressure trend and the day of the week. So I would give the data display to the Rangeman. Like the data that's displayed on this watch is better than the data display on the Mudman. Because when I get to the let's just show this part. If I go to, let's go to world time. I'll point this out. So if I go to world time, it is 2 o'clock here. This multi-purpose dial becomes a 24-hour dial. So straight down at the 6 o'clock position, that's actually noon, middle of the day. Okay, and the very top, the 12 o'clock position, that's midnight. So it tells me what the time is locally with that blinking cursor, that blinking line right there. That's the local time, which is 2:03 or 14:03. And then the dual time, or the UTC, which is England, it is 8 o'clock at night, and that's the solid indicator there on the multi-purpose dial. That's the solid one. So I have a dual display here that shows me what's going on there in a visual sense. So that's kind of helpful, but I can also do the same. There's a lot of information that's similar to that when it comes to the timer. That's on there, the countdown timer. The alarm is on there as well. It tells you the local time, and it also tells you what the alarm is set at. Sunrise, sunset tells you the local time. It also tells you the sunrise and the sunset. Great. And again, you're looking at all that information anyway, so this is nothing really earth-shattering, but it's a good visual, much like the compass. If I press the compass on here, I have the degrees and I also have the needle. I actually only need one. So if we're going to be, splitting hairs over redundancy, the Mudman is redundant as well. Okay. All right. The comfort to wear is going to go to the Rangeman for sure. The Mudman, just not as comfortable to wear. It isn't. It's height off the wrist. It's much better that way. But as far as the comfort of the feel of the watch on the wrist, I'm going to give it to the Rangeman because of the strap, the keeper, that whole thing. It's more comfortable to wear. I think the Mudman is a close second because of these comfort wedges that they have on the inside here. That just kind of makes sure that the watch hugs your wrist a little bit better. But the strap is just incredibly stiff. So the comfortability of wearing the watch tends to suffer. Now, the practicality of wearing the watch goes to the Mudman because it's just a lower profile overall. Like I said, the height off the wrist on the Mudman was, 50? No, it's 14.8. Whereas on the Rangeman, it was like 18.2. Significantly different height off the wrist. Okay? Now, where would I wear this watch? Under what circumstances? Is there a watch, either one of these, that you could wear for more than just outdoor work or labor, hands-on labor work, kind of tough guy stuff? Could you wear this maybe for some maybe social occasions? Yeah, I think there's not a lot of difference between these two. They both look very similar as far as just the overall, perception that you're going to get from wearing these watches. There really isn't, other than, again, the height off the wrist is going to allow you to wear long sleeve shirts or jackets a little bit easier with the Mudman. Although it's still tall off the wrist. It is, what did I say? It was 14.8. That's still pretty tall. Most dive watches are in that range or maybe less. Usually in that 13, so a little bit shorter than that, a little bit shorter on the wrist, I should say, closer to the wrist. So to me, the Mudman, I think, probably has a little bit more capabilities because it's closer to the wrist. But as far as looks go, it doesn't really improve. I do like the red accents on both of them with the black. You can tell that the Mudman has just a little bit more pizzazz when it comes down to that than the Rangeman does. Okay, you got this layer, almost like a gasket, between the top half and bottom half of the case. So I think the Mudman just edges out the Rangeman, although the Rangeman, I don't know, it does look kind of cool. There's a cool look to it. It's just the function is just, I think it suffers as a result. So when I add up the total for these watches, what I'm ending up with is the Rangeman is edging out the Mudman. If I was to give that subjective, this is what I would do, I think I'd give a little bit more to the Mudman, which then puts it into a tie. So I hate ties. Absolutely hate ties. If I was to pick one, I'm going to go with the Rangeman overall because subjectively, I do like some of the things that go on with the Mudman. I'm not a fan of the strap. I don't like the fact that this thing struggled with the atomic timekeeping. One thing I didn't mention though is the use of the light button itself. This, if there's a tiebreaker, this might be a good one. It's really minute, but if you look at the angle with which you would press the light button on the Rangeman versus the Mudman, I can press downward a little bit easier versus the Mudman. It's a little bit more horizontal, so the angle at which I press that button is a little bit more. I think it's a slightly more awkward, and I mean slightly more awkward. But again, it goes to the Rangeman. And I love the texturing on the buttons. I think the texturing kind of breaks things up a little bit. This is a little bit more, I don't know, it just doesn't quite have the same look overall. I don't mind for the aesthetic part of it, the segmented display. The function behind it, I'm not a huge fan of, which is where this one comes across. But it's such a close deal that I think the Rangeman actually edges out the Mudman. On the form side, the function, yeah, a little bit leaning towards the Rangeman on the function side. But if you're looking for legibility, no doubt you got to go with the Mudman. If legibility is not a huge concern for you, then I think the Rangeman is definitely the way to go. There's all kinds of other good features that go along with it. So the strength of this really is the clarity with which you can see everything on the display. So put in the comments down below what you think of my rating. I'm going to give this one to the Rangeman, but not by much. I think it's by the skin of its buttons or teeth. I don't know what you would say. Put the comments down below what you think of that. Also, check out my webpage, realidealgear.com, for any reviewed watches or gear that's on for sale on the webpage, realidealgear.com. There you go. My name is Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear review. We'll catch you guys next time.